welcome back. We start with India, where the controversial citizenship bill that sparked violent protests in the country has been challenged in the Supreme Court. The Indian Union Muslim League, a political party, has petitioned the court to declare the bill illegal.
Thousands of troops have been moved to the northeastern states of Assam and Tripura to control violence. Assam city of Guwahati has become the epicenter of protest and has been placed under an indefinite curfew. Hundreds of protesters have been detained in Guwahati, Dibrugarh and Jorhat. Internet services have been suspended in 10 districts of Assam and the entire state of Tripura. Meanwhile, the opposition Congress party has called for a complete shutdown strike in Tripura. Yesterday, the parliament passed the bill to give citizenship to non-Muslim minorities from 3 neighboring countries.
Moving on to the US, where the House of Representatives has approved a $738 billion defense bill. This bill allows the creation of a Space Force, the 6th armed service of the United States. The Republican-controlled Senate is expected to pass the National Defense Authorization Act by the end of next week. President Trump said he will sign the bill as soon as it passes. The defense spending has been increased by about 2.8%. The bill increases pay for the troops by 3.1%. In a related development, a U.S. Senate committee has approved a bill to impose sanctions on Turkey over its military operation in Syria and purchase of a Russian air defense system. The Foreign Relations Committee passed the American National Security and Preventing the Resurgence of ISIS Act of 2019 with a vote of 18-4. The curbs will be applied to key individuals in the Turkish government, including the defense and finance ministers. It will also impose sanctions on Russians helping Syrian President Bashar al-Assad acquire weapons and defense services. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan have pledged to continue cooperating in the military and energy affairs. Meanwhile, the US says North Korea's latest missile tests are deeply counterproductive and closing off prospects for negotiating peace. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Kelly Craft, said Washington is ready to be flexible and take concrete steps with Pyongyang towards an agreement. This report has all the details.
Not bring the DPRK greater security. It will not bring the DPRK or the region greater stability. It will not help the DPRK achieve the economic opportunities it seeks. In fact, it will do the opposite.
Meanwhile, Russia and China have stressed the importance of dialogue with Pyongyang.
China says it has rejected the idea of joining a framework to discuss nuclear arms control with US and Russia. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying said Beijing has no intention of joining trilateral arms control negotiations with the two countries. Hua said the US is trying to shift responsibility to China when it comes to nuclear disarmament. She was referring to comments made by US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo after his meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Washington. Pompeo and Lavrov discussed the New START bilateral nuclear arms reduction treaty, which is due to expire on February 2021. Pompeo said the US believed other parties such as China need to be brought into a wider discussion on arms control. The US House Judiciary Committee has begun debating formal articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump. The 2 articles are expected to be brought to the House floor next week. The documents accuse Trump of abusing his power by forcing Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden and obstructing Congress. Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler says Congress cannot fulfill its duty if Trump blocks congressional requests for information. The committee's Republican member, Doug Collins, accused the Democrats of being predisposed towards impeachment. Trump has denied wrongdoing and condemned the impeachment inquiry as a hoax. In Niger, 71 soldiers have been killed in an attack on a military camp in the western part of the country. In a statement, the Defense Ministry says 12 others were wounded in the western Talaburi region. Niger's Army Colonel Boubacar Hassan said the troops came under attack by hundreds of heavily armed terrorists. President Mohamedou Issoufou cut short a trip to Egypt to return home following the attack. The assault is believed to be the deadliest against Niger's military in living memory. No group has yet claimed the responsibility. Algeria's presidential elections are taking place today after 10 months of political turmoil. The vote has been bitterly opposed by a protest movement that sees it as a regime ploy to cling on to power. 5 candidates are in the running for office. Protesters have rejected the contenders, calling them children of the regime of former President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Voter turnout is also expected to be low, with protesters saying election is designed to preserve the status quo. It is the first vote since Bouteflika was forced out in April after 2 decades in power. In the UK, Britons are voting in the country's 3rd general election in under 5 years. 650 constituencies across England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland are up for grabs. Over 45 million voters are registered to take part in the election process. Conservative leader Boris Johnson and Labour Party chief Jeremy Corbyn are the 2 front-runners hoping to form the next government. A majority government requires 326 seats in the House of Commons. The polls are being seen as a second referendum on Brexit. As Britain is voting in today's general election, Islamophobia has emerged as a big concern for Muslim voters. Britain's Muslims say they should have more representation in the politics. Details in this report.
Britain is preparing for one of its most crucial elections. It's a country where Muslims form over 5% of the population, but anti-Muslim sentiment remains a huge problem. There has also been a spike in hate crimes targeting Muslims. The public affairs manager of the Muslim Council of Britain says Islamophobia is the community's biggest election issue.
The main concern of British Muslims this election is Islamophobia. That's the #1 thing people are looking for their political parties to commit to tackling.
Abdullah Falik, head of research at the Cordoba Foundation, adds British Muslims are looking for candidates who will safeguard their rights. He believes the Muslim community should have more representatives in the political arena.
With the current situation of a Brexit debate and discussion, the things are not so easy. You see the far right and other elements who are, coded racists or coded Islamophobes are taking the political sphere. They're trying to campaign on issues around Iran immigration, on security and terrorism, but essentially they are targeting the Muslim community.
On the other side, previous governments have been unable to define Islamophobia. Reports suggest if Muslims do come out to vote, their impact could be transformative in many parts of the UK.
French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe has introduced a pension reform plan in the face of fierce resistance from trade unions. Philippe promised a guaranteed minimum monthly pension of €1,000 for workers with at least 42 years of service. He said the legal retirement age will remain at 62 years. Workers will need to work until 64 in order to receive their full pension. The government plan includes a bonus system to encourage people to work longer. The plan said the reforms will only apply to people entering the labor market after the year 2022. The overhaul plan has angered labor unions, which have called nationwide strikes.
In a deleterious and anxious-inducing context that's molding the rise for the extreme right in the country, you overstepped new boundaries with your announcements this afternoon. And this boundary is the retirement age with full pension at 64, regardless the hardships of the job.
In Iraq, 2 rockets have landed near the Baghdad International Airport. In a statement, the Defense Ministry said security forces found several rockets and a launcher in the locality. The strikes are the latest in a spate of rocket attacks on military installations last week. On Monday, 4 rockets hit a military base near the airport, wounding 6 people. The attacks come amid continued unrest in Iraq, which has been rocked by anti-government protests since October. No one has yet claimed responsibility for the strike. The Israeli parliament has approved a motion to hold new national elections on March 2nd. The approval came hours after a final deadline to form a government following the September polls passed. Israelis will return to the polls for third election in a year after the two largest parties failed to seal a power-sharing deal before Wednesday's deadline. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his main rival Benny Gantz were unable to form a governing coalition. President Reuven Rivlin had offered legislators the opportunity to cobble together a majority parliamentary bloc. This approach also failed, leading the country to new polls in March. State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi has returned to the ICJ to defend Myanmar against accusations of genocide of Rohingya Muslims. Gambia is expected to argue that Myanmar's actions do meet the definition of genocide. At the final day of hearing, each side will have a chance to counter arguments put forward by the other over the past 2 days. The verdict of the case is expected in January. Yesterday, Suu Kyi said Myanmar's military will be punished if found guilty. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In Gambia, former President Yahya Jammeh is still revered by a part of the population, despite the damning of evidence against him. With the country still reeling from the years of dictatorship, his hardcore supporters still want him to return. More about his regime and support in this report.
Former Gambian dictator Yahya Jammeh lost the country's presidential elections on December 1st, 2016. The event marked the end of a brutal regime that lasted 22 years in this tiny West African state, entirely surrounded by Senegal. But 3 years on, die-hard fans still sing the praises of the one-time tyrant, now in exile in Equatorial Guinea.
He is the only president who can develop the country. He is the only president who will know that when we speak with him, he will know what we are talking about. He will understand what we are talking about.
A body called the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission, or TRRC, was set up to investigate crimes committed under the Jammeh regime. It has heard shocking testimony, including from hitmen who say they carried out dozens of murders for the regime. Harrowing allegations of torture also feature prominently, and Jammeh himself has been accused of rape. But supporters reject these accusations out of hand, and are confident that the APRC, the former ruling party, will bounce back.
This can show it by yourself. The crowd and the people that show their love, the TRRC, this will show them that still now people love the former president.
But with evidence against his regime continuing to stack up, if Jammeh ever does decide to return from exile, he would almost certainly be risking prosecution.
Mexico has recalled its ambassador to Argentina, Oscar Ricardo Valero, after he was caught stealing. Surveillance footage captured the diplomat allegedly shoplifting a $9 book from an iconic Buenos Aires bookstore. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said Valero should not be lynched because we all make mistakes. Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard said if the video is verified, the diplomat will be sacked immediately. Valero is now due to appear before the Foreign Ministry's Ethics Committee and faces dismissal. In Serbia, farmers are growing the world's hottest peppers under the snow. Despite the wintry temperatures, they cultivate chili crops beneath Mount Coriante in the town of Niska Banja. This report has all the more details on chilies.
December snow flurries in Serbia haven't stopped Alexander Tanic from cultivating his scorching hot crop. The crinkly chili pepper, called the Carolina Reaper, is listed by Guinness World Records as the world's hottest. First bred in South Carolina, the pepper boasts 1.6 million heat units on the Scoville scale.
Out of a love for cooking and hot food, I started researching about these sorts of hot peppers. I used to think that I ate spicy food before, but after I tried these chili peppers, I realized I had never even tasted hot before.
TANIC now grows about 15 varieties of hot chilies, including the Trinidad Moruga Scorpio. Farmers grind up the peppers for ultra-spicy sauces, with flavours ranging from pear to chocolate.
It is very interesting that these peppers can grow and cross-pollinate, thanks to the bees and the wind. So new sorts are created, and it takes time for them to be established.
Serbians now plan to launch an eye-watering chili eating competition next summer. It's guaranteed not to be for the faint of heart or tongue.
In South Africa's Kalahari Desert, a team of British engineers and mechanics are trying to construct a car capable of breaking the current land speed record of 760 miles per hour. But there's still some distance to travel before the super racer is ready to achieve that goal. More about the super racer in this report.
On the desert floor, rocketing up to 900 kilometers an hour in South Africa's Kalahari Desert, this car, created by British company Bloodhound, is still in its testing phase. They hope to get to the point where it can compete to break the land speed record of 1,223 kilometers an hour, the fastest speed achieved by a person in a vehicle on land.
That's 900 kilometres an hour out of the way. We're now going to target something around about 980, see how that goes. And if we can get that fast, we'll see if we can sneak it up towards 1,000.
The 16-kilometre stretch is located in the bed of a dried-out lake in the Kalahari Desert, one of few places in the world flat enough to shoot for such speeds. It's an out-of-the-ordinary car, with an engine to match. The vehicle is powered by a fighter plane's jet engine, which will later be reinforced with an additional one from a rocket.
As it is a car, it has a steering wheel, has a throttle pedal, has a brake pedal. The total power while we're in South Africa this year is about 54,000 brake horsepower.
With the first phase of testing complete, Bloodhound are back in the UK, with their return to the South African desert planned for the summer of 2021. By then, they hope to come equipped with an extra rocket engine, the boost that they hope will enable them to set a new land speed record.
The US Federal Reserve has kept interest rates unchanged after cutting rates at each of the last 3 meetings. The Federal Open Market Committee maintained the funds rate in a target range of 1.5% to 1.75%. The Fed said the labor market remains strong and economic activity has been rising at a moderate rate. The central bank's chairman, Jerome Powell, said the economic outlook remains favorable despite global developments and ongoing risks. He said current monetary policy will probably remain unchanged. Stock markets across Europe are trading higher after the US Federal Reserve kept the interest rate steady for 2020. Investors are monitoring trade negotiations between the US and China ahead of December 15th deadline for new tariffs on Chinese goods. London's FTSE 100 is trading nearly 0.5% higher. Balfour BAT saw its shares surge over 3%. CAC 40 in Paris and Frankfurt's DAX are trading fractionally higher. Meanwhile, in Asia, Seoul's Kospi led gains, closing over 1.5% higher at the end of the day. Shares of Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix surged over 2%. Bucking up, Hong Kong's Hang Seng also closed over 1% higher. International oil prices have gained nearly 0.5% as OPEC forecast a smaller supply deficit next year. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.